Good morning. I'm Charlotte Jones, co host of the John Telford Detroit Show, coming to you every Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock on WJZZ Cool TV. Also streaming on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Dr. John Talford is a former Detroit Public Schools superintendent, a former world class athlete, conqueror of Olympic champions, a championship track coach, poet, newspaper columnist, a longtime civil rights crusader, and author of 7 books: Creative Insubordination, What Old Men Know, The Will Robinson Story, The Poetic Prancings of Mad John, The Poet Emperor of Earth, and his explosive autobiography, A Life on the Run. Plus, another upcoming poetry book, Athletes, Activism, and Apple Boughs, a Detroit poetic epic. His books are available on Amazon.com or by calling 313-460-8272. That's 313-460-8272. Dr. Talford has been called a legend and also a lightning rod for controversy, a recipient of the City Council's Spirit of Detroit Award and the Joe Louis Foundation Spirit of the Champ Award. He was named Wayne State University's Alumnus of the Year, and a Detroit track is named for him. His email is drjohntelfordedd@aol.com. That's John-Telfordedd@aol.com. Dr. Talford also has a show on WCHB AM 1340 that airs on Saturdays at 9:30 in the morning and Mondays at 6:30 in the evening. That's on WCHB AM 1340, Saturdays at 9:30 a.m. and Mondays at 6:30 p.m. And now, without further ado, I present to you that old native Detroiter, the one and only Dr. John Talford.
Thank you, Charlotte Jones, a.k.a. Char J, author of A Ain't Always for Apple. A Ain't Always for Apple, an erotic adult alphabet book. A Ain't Always for Apple. And of course, I am author of the new poetry book, Athletes, Activism, and Apple Boughs. Athletes, Activism, and Apple Boughs, a Detroit poetic epic. And I want to say this just to get started, because we're going to have Elena Harada on the show today. My name is Detroit. I'm a blue-collar town. Blue salt melts my mid-March snow. Speedy cars and sprinters spring from me. I father fierce fighters and funky music. In a Motown moment, I can spit the blues right back in a bureaucrat's eye. Have you never seen blue salt? No complex chemistry here, only the old color of a new sky. And we've got a new sky dawning on Detroit today, because as I said, we've got Elena Harada, the great Elena Harada, in the studio today. And you know, I'm going to share a verse with you that I share many times when I have folks on my show. If the verse reminds me of my guest on the show, and it reminds me of my guest, Elena Harada, today. And the poem is The Value of Verse. Verse comes to us by pen or voice. We thus can always take our choice. Let me be also sure to mention that verse will gain us righteous vengeance. Via deft poetic arts that can topple oligarchs. Verse will clearly, plainly lay out what we poets dare to say out. Like gentle, mewling lambs, no more, but rather with a cacophonic roar of lions. And we've got a lioness in the station today in the person of Elena Harada. So, Elena, welcome to the John Telford Detroit Show with Char J and me.
Thank you. Thank you.
And Roger Penzabeni welcomes you too. The station manager. So, we're going to we're going to talk about some concerns that involve the library today. Something that is dear to your heart and dear to my heart. And we're going to talk about tax captures. And what are tax captures, Elena? Define tax captures for
Actually,
us.
it's a little known concept, but a very self-explanatory term, capturing of taxes. And if you can imagine the taxes that go from a library bond being captured and having quite a bit of that severed off and given to the Downtown Development Authority so that they can build their projects downtown. I want to talk about that a little bit, and I want our listeners to try to be patient with this concept because it's a little bit layered. The taxes that we pay for the library are under what's called the Detroit exception, meaning every other city in the state of Michigan is banned from allowing their taxes to be used for anything but the purpose intended. So when you pay
Every
a bond,
other city except Detroit.
Detroit is the exception, thanks to our Jim Crow mayor, Duggan. Duggan lobbied for Detroit to be exempt from the ban. The ban means that if you have a bond for your libraries, if you have a bond for your schools, it must go to the libraries and the schools. In Detroit, since Duggan wanted to have developers take Detroit and turn it into an apartheid paradise, they needed money to do that, but they didn't need our money. They had their own. They have their own. The money that just went to Illich and Stephen Ross, they're multiple billionaires, and yet they took money from our library. Now, let me come back to that.
They
Remember
took it from
tax
the schools
captures?
too, as I understand it.
They
The
took it
schools
from
got
the
some
schools.
of that money.
Oh yeah, the schools got really hit because the schools built Little Caesars Arena in perpetuity. They get all the money from the taxes from Detroit Public Schools, and not a penny of the seats from Little Caesars go to Detroit.
Right.
Much like, remember Olympia, remember Joe Louis? A portion of the ticket went to the city, not this. Duggan made sure that Illich got to keep every penny. And there's absolutely no money coming from Little Caesars Arena, and the arena is built on Detroit land, but they don't have to pay any taxes for it.
Is that in any way reversible?
Yes, it is reversible. I don't know much about the arena, but the tax captures could be included in the statewide ban. We have to include Detroit in the statewide ban, and that will be a state legislative initiative. In other words, the whole state has to agree to that. Now, because the state takes that money and gives it to the DDA in Detroit, the state allowed that legislation thanks to Duggan. And also, we're going to have to fight Whitmer on this as well, because Whitmer really dances to Duggan's tune. Now, I want to tell you the state Democratic Party now dominates the state, right? They have the majority
Yeah, we've got
in the House.
the Senate, and the governor's
Right.
chair.
So who's done very well by that so far? Labor, right to work has been reversed. Women, the abortion bans we're safe for choice in Michigan.
For now we are, although that's
Right.
going to be a big fight
Yeah,
nationally.
but that's okay. But it can't happen in the state.
Yeah.
The state has the right to do this.
Yeah.
What else? There's been labor, there's been women, and even possibly the immigrants getting driver's license back, which would be a good thing. So that's 3. But what about Detroit and the libraries and the schools? That would be the tax capture ban. And the other thing is emergency management, which has not been overturned. These are what you would call the Jim Crow laws in Michigan. Emergency management and tax captures being only taking from the blackest school district in Detroit and giving it to rich billionaires. It's only Detroit.
Well, we sure don't need to take a damn dime from Detroit, particularly from the schools.
But especially they don't. They don't need this money. And they're building projects that we do not need. We're basically paying to create an oasis for white people. High income people will be able to live in these places. They're saying there's going to be some affordable housing. No, there isn't.
No,
They're going to have a little oasis that is built with our money. This is like what they do in third world countries where there's a walled community for the diplomats, a walled community for the rich. In the meantime, all the other poor people are kept outside of it. Do you think that these rich people moving into Detroit are going to put their kids in Detroit public schools? No. Do they need the libraries? No. But they can take our money from the schools and the libraries and build their little paradise. And many of these places where the rich people are moving in, like where I live in Corktown, they don't have to pay taxes for quite a while. I have to pay taxes, you have to pay taxes, unless you can be lucky enough to be either below so that you can be in the poverty exemption, or rich enough to not have to pay. But the ordinary Detroiters are paying all the taxes in Detroit.
And
Take
what they're
Go ahead.
and what they're calling affordable housing, they mentioned the building that they're building. The apartments will be $800. That's not affordable if you only get $1,200 a month. So no, that's not affordable.
Because what they called affordable, they included Livonia and Warren in the
No.
average median income. Livonia? Really? So if you can live in Livonia, you're figured into this amount? That's what they did because Duggan is very determined to get black people and poor people out of Detroit. I'll give you an example. I live in Corktown. Around the block from me is the Clement Kern Gardens. It was built in 1984. I was one of the first tenants in there. It's a Section 8, 84 unit housing. They're going to tear it down. They're going to demolish an entire block of residents because that's almost all the black people in Corktown. There's about maybe 10 Latino families in there, the rest almost all entirely black. They're going to tear it down. There will be an empty field there. And they're telling people, well, you can come back when we're finished rebuilding it. They had no reason to tear it down. No reason to tear it down except to move the people out of there.
What are they going to do with that empty field?
They're going to leave it probably until they decide to build something else with it. If they build something else right away, then the people would come back, so they don't want to do that. But I can tell you that I was a first tenant in that complex, and it had lied fallow for 30 years because they got rid of the Mexicans that had lived there. That was a completely Mexican neighborhood in Corktown. Bagley, between Rosa Parks and Trumbull, was completely, almost entirely Mexican. But then they tore it down, supposedly for urban renewal. There was nothing there but a field. There was a huge grassy field. I lived across the street from there for many years, and I was on the planning committee for the Clement Kern Gardens, and it took 10 years to get it built. MISTA did not allow us to make it a co-op. If it was a co-op, they wouldn't be able to do this.
What did not allow us?
MISTA, the Michigan State Housing Authority.
Okay.
So now, who is subject to these tax captures?
Who gets them?
Yeah. So
Who's subject to them is Detroit for every tax on your bill. Detroit gets tax captures for special needs students because there's a bond for that. So special needs students in Detroit actually give up some of their money for Illich and Ross because they need it, right? Dan Gilbert, Ford, all of them get tax captures. Every single thing on your tax bill, if you live in Detroit, is subject to a capture. That would be money being taken from Detroiters for the things that we pay taxes for and given to Downtown Development Authority.
Now, you mentioned that this is reversible. What processes do we as citizens, grassroots citizens of the city of Detroit, need to undertake to start to make this happen?
What we're going to do is first we have to educate because people don't even know this. People do not know why the library, for example, doesn't have a handicap ramp, why the library branches don't have a first floor bathroom, because they'll tell us at the Library Commission, we don't have the money for that. But they don't tell you anywhere in the media, even when they talked about this big 800 million that went to Illich, they never mention. They say, oh, they got it, the taxes. They never mention that it came from Detroit schools and Detroit libraries. They fail to mention that every single time. That's where the money's being taken from. And it's not like the library has this big surplus. This year, the library is going to lose $5 million to these tax captures.
We've
which
closed a lot of libraries.
and the main library doesn't even have the proper HVAC system because Duggan is holding it hostage. That's another whole story which requires a show of its own. But I will tell you that this money can come back to Detroit if we have a statewide vote to include Detroit in the ban. That's all it is. Freeze the tax captures. You can't cancel them.
Will the rest
can't
of the
get-
state vote in that regard?
If we
for
do our
us?
work, organizing,
Okay,
yep.
okay,
And also
okay.
remember that Duggan wants to be the governor. So the governor has the whole state, correct? And the governor that we have is part of this cover-up of the tax captures. Remember that the governor that we have is completely dances to Duggan's tune. When she's done with her term, she's going to support Duggan. Duggan is probably going to support Mary Sheffield.
I like Mary Sheffield. She was the only one that voted, against
That's
that.
fine if you don't know any better.
Oh, really?
If you don't know any better, how would one person vote like that and 8 people vote against it unless that was orchestrated? And don't tell me that you can get 10,000 votes for city council, but you can't get 4 with you? You can't get 4 of your colleagues to vote with you? What good is
I
that?
think our father said he
Yeah, we
he
had him
didn't
on the
accept.
show.
He didn't think she voted correctly. So
That doesn't matter. She did that for a show.
You think so?
One person? Oh yeah, she gave the whole thing, and she did that for a show because she's running for mayor.
Yeah, I was
She had
thinking
to do
about
that.
voting for her for mayor, too.
Nope, I'm telling you, she did that for a show. She has not voted with the people when it mattered. The only time she votes with the people is when it doesn't matter, and that's when you got the votes against you.
Jeez.
If she would have gotten 4 more people with her, that would have been impressive, wouldn't it? That would have meant no, and that would have meant that they have to go over the city council. Then we went to the state and asked the, what was it, the Michigan Development Corporation. They voted unanimously like 3 blind mice for Duggan's project.
Yeah, that they did. I remember that.
We went up there in busloads and protested it.
Well, she opposed it.
No, that was fake. It was
It's-
completely fake.
it was-
If she was serious, she would have gotten the other people to vote with her.
But she tried.
How do you know that?
Well, I don't know that.
Right.
So you're saying that was pure theatrics
It's
then?
pure theatrics.
Oh, man.
Absolute pure theatrics.
Man,
Yes.
I've been disillusioned enough at the age of 87 without getting more disillusioned. But,
No, it's important not to be delusional. It's
You're
very
right.
important not to be delusional.
Yeah.
When we saw what she did, it was shocking that 8 people voted for that project and only 1 voice. That was meaning that they put her up there to be the voice of the people. That's to fool us. Don't be fooled by that. Don't be
boy.
fooled. And every single one of the people that voted for the women, I'll say that, the women that voted for it, gave all these reasons why they were against it, and they voted for it. Like so many abused wives.
Wow.
And then the men, at least I'll give the men this. They always vote the wrong way, but they didn't even pretend.
Jeez.
The men on council are terrible. Each one of them is useless. Every single one of them always votes with the mayor. Always votes with the mayor. But now,
Coleman Young, too.
Coleman Young, he votes with the mayor every time. Yep,
Oh, boy.
yep. I would really like to think otherwise, but no.
Okay.
When
Well,
you say Coleman Young, I don't even think about him. I think of his father.
And
I
you
was
can't
like-
think of his, all right.
I'm like,
I know, like, why does he have that face? Why does he have that name? It's really shameful.
I go way back with his father,
Right.
because he followed my running career, but he was still a state senator. Me and Cliff Hatcher, he was very supportive of me and my old buddy Cliff Hatcher, who, by the way, is in this relay team up here. The late Cliff Hatcher, my best friend in life, ran for Central High School, ran a 48.8, but don't let me get started on athletics. Okay, who else is subject
What
to?
does it mean to our city is where we are now, John.
Yeah, but I wanted to ask, who or what else is subject to tax captures? Have we,
Okay, so the taxes are captured from Detroit Public Schools, Detroit Public Libraries, and special education. Those are the ones that are mostly the ones that are taken and put into the Downtown Development Authority, which does not have a limit on how much it can take from us. It used to have a limit. So when you hear Duggan say Coleman Young initiated tax captures, that was true. And I want to bring you to this moment for old heads.
You're talking about the first Coleman Young.
The real Coleman Young.
Yeah,
The real Coleman Young.
Said that he, during the period of time that he introduced tax captures for Detroit, that was because there was absolute disinvestment from Detroit, and there would have been no money to develop anything downtown like the Renaissance Center or anything else. There would have been no money. So he introduced tax captures in order to
Well,
be
he
able
did
to
that
take.
with Henry Ford II. They collaborated on it.
But that was in order to be able to build when there was no money in Detroit and all the white flight and all of the
Yeah.
corporations were leaving. So
Yeah,
that was
right.
to address disinvestment. And it was meant to develop downtown. Downtown is so now overdeveloped and the rest of the city is so underdeveloped. But they're still robbing the poor to give to the rich.
Well, they're developing the whole Gold Coast. I don't know if you've been reading, in my building is a river house, and they're trying to take over my building.
Right.
That's what I'm trying to tell the people in my building, but I'm having a little difficulty getting through to them, which is why I'm running.
Who's trying to take it over?
Well, you've got to talk to a lady who was president of our board. Her name is Virginia Starkey. And she has been sharing some very disturbing information with me that she gleaned when she was president. I'm not going to go into all the details on that because that's a show in and of itself. But what is happening is they're taking over between Woodward Avenue and Grosse Pointe on the river, at the riverfront.
Of course.
They're stealing all of these buildings,
Right.
and they're putting black people out. They're raising the rent. And that's what they want to do to our co-op. And there may be a way that they can do that. I'm trying to study some of the possibilities of that happening to make sure it won't happen. But anyway, that's what they're doing from Woodward Avenue to Grosse Pointe. And
They're trying to take the river.
the same
Yep.
thing you're talking
Yep.
about in Corktown.
Right.
They're doing
Yep.
there.
Yep.
And we have so as I've said to you, Elena, we have so many battlefronts we've got to fight on. As liberal progressives, which one do we tackle first?
The reason I raised the issue on the tax captures is because that's the money that the developers are using. Now imagine, let's say for example, if the taxes were not diverted, the developers would have to use their own money. But they're doing
Which
two
they
things
should
at
do.
once. Yeah,
They're
but they're doing,
multi-billionaires. Why can't they use
because
their own money?
they're doing two things at once, and this is really important to understand. They're not only saving all their own money, but they're taking the money from people that will no longer be able to live in Detroit because you have to chase schools, you have to chase the places
That's
where
right.
you have to raise your kids. The overtaxation, they could have paid that money back. They could have paid back the pensioners, but instead they're
Yeah.
continuously giving it to the billionaires.
That was
This
my
is what has
pension
to
they
stop.
took. I worked for the city, and that was my pension that they took. But I'm like, why don't you get it from the billionaires? Why are you taking it from a
Right.
retiree? I've got a friend; she can't even afford her medicine because they cut. She has breast cancer because they cut her money.
And yet, they're giving that money still to billionaires.
Yeah.
So the thing is, we have to address them head on, first of all. We have to confront them. They never get confronted. The DDA is not elected. Nobody knows who they are. Why is Chris Illich and Stephen Ross able to take our children's money? Why do people who are not from Detroit, don't live in Detroit, are not subject to any of the struggles of Detroit, able to make Detroit harder for the poorest people? Only if we allow it.
And you're talking about the schools. You were one of the school board members that appointed me superintendent. Back in the old days when we thought we could fight the fight, but we're still fighting the fight on the outside now, not on the inside. But some kids are leaving the schools to go to charter schools, whose scores are lower than the public schools. But their parents see that as their access because they realize that they're not being taught to read in the public
Parents
schools.
are desperate.
Yeah.
Parents are desperate. That's what makes people move their kids around all the time. They're desperate for a place that they can feel that their child will be, number one, safe, and then second, that they'll be able to go to a stable school that's not going to close. That's what they're hopeful for. But these charter schools were allowed to come in and proliferate. They wouldn't allow that in other places, but now, watch. In Grosse Pointe, they're closing schools because they don't want Detroit kids coming over there. So they're closing their schools. What's the main reason anybody moves anywhere? For the schools, right?
And the tax breaks.
Right, that's, yeah, the rich people. If they're coming for the tax breaks, they sure aren't coming for the schools because that's where it was taken from. So the thing is to follow, there are some senators that we have who are going to present some bills to include Detroit in the tax capture. Sylvia Santana is one who actually presented the first one in the last session, and there are more who are joining. But for anybody listening who's all over the state, when you see that Detroit needs to be included in the ban, this is genuinely a Jim Crow administration.
Well, no
that we have
question. We're the only city in the state
that has
is
to,
not in this ban.
that we're the only city in the state that's
No.
not in the ban, and it's because of the city's mayor. Can you imagine a mayor that's so contemptuous of the people of that city, of his supposedly own city, that he keeps the place so segregated, that he keeps it so unequal, that he gives the rich poor people's money? Rich old white men who have one foot in the grave are taking the money of small children. That's a move. That's a real move of contempt. Stephen Ross doesn't need our money. Illich is dead. We still are not free of Illich. Dan Gilbert doesn't need our money. These are billionaires who are taking the poorest people's money. And it has to be understood that that's what they're doing. It has to be understood. And the other thing I want to raise is these foundations. These foundations, the 501c3s, the philanthropists, are getting their money from them. Where do they get their money? From us. They're giving us our own money and trying to make us feel grateful for it. So when they throw crumbs at you, and you don't want to talk about your employer because you work for a nonprofit, I want to just say, if you're from Detroit, as we are, if your father, if your family worked at Chrysler, Ford, GM, whatever, we talk trash about our employers all the time. You're a worker, you're not the owner. Everybody hates their boss. If you talk trash to a person about a nonprofit, they will act like it's a cult, and they will defend it, and they will turn you away from them. It's very interesting how the nonprofits are training people to be brainwashed to think that they are doing a job that is saving Detroit. They are saving us from information that will tell us that they are taking our money and using it to make us feel lucky. What's going to happen in these schools where they're taking the music out of, for example, Bates
Oh,
Academy? They're taking the music out of Bates
They're
Academy.
taking the music out of just about everywhere. I
Bec-
learned
and
to play
they're-
the violin at my elementary school on Linwood and McGraw. They taught me to play the violin.
Right. Well, that's because there was public education and there was administrators over departments. Now we have so many nonprofits and so many charter schools that all these top people are getting all this money and there's nothing leaking into the classroom. That's why they're closing the music programs and the arts programs. And if you behave and write a grant, then your school might get some art or your school might get some music. If you have a good relationship with a nonprofit down the street, you might get something. But a public education means that everybody has access. So now we have these nonprofits. Most of them are led by white people in the city of Detroit. They have the majority black students, majority Latino students, but we have these white saviors in the nonprofits. And a lot of people don't like to hear this. I'll just name Living Arts. I'll name all of these other places where they have directors that make as much as the director of the arts department in Detroit Public Schools made, except that it's one little tiny nonprofit, making maybe $150,000 a year, and they have working artists, which are all basically, instead of teachers, they're like sharecroppers. They are private contractors. They go around to schools. They have to take their own car, their own supplies, and they go around to schools and teach. Maybe they have to go to 5 places in a day. Maybe they go to 10 places in a week, instead of a teacher in a classroom for whom students come and take art. That's what charters and that's what privatization has done.
You remember the EAA?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I remember that very well. You know, they took 15 of our schools and tried to make a school district out of that with our schools and our property.
Failing every one of those kids for 4 years.
That's what happened,
Wow.
and they were paying their administrators incredible salaries.
Yep.
You know, they tried to steal me. You know, when you had me as superintendent working pro bono, they tried to steal me. They took my late lamented wife Adrian and me into a house in Grosse Pointe, and I thought we were just being dinner guests, but they offered me $185,000 salary
Yeah, well,
for 5 years.
I
Five-
think I would have took it, John.
well, let me tell you, Adrian didn't speak to me for about a week until I finally explained to her, look, you know, it would have been like being a trustee at Auschwitz.
Wow.
You know, she was Jewish, then she understood. You know, but how could I have faced you? How could I have faced Helen Moore? How could I have looked at anybody in the eye
Maybe
if I
you
had
could've-
taken that money? Go
Maybe you
ahead.
could have done some good with it. I don't know.
Oh, no.
You're watching the Dr. John Telford Detroit Show, live streaming on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter, and other top social media platforms. Like us, follow us, share us, comment, and subscribe. Thank you for watching WJZZ Cool TV, the coolest station in the world. We have our Thursday night WJZZ Legacy Jazz Series at the St. Regis, and I can't read this. Okay, there we go. And coming up not tomorrow, but next week, the Charles Prophet Jr. and I can't see that. But anyway, we're there. Tickets are $15. Show starts at 7. It's going to be a lovely show. Okay, so come on out, check us out. It's a fun evening, reasonably priced. There's food and drink available for purchase. And also, we have Farm Days events with Recovery Park. They presented, those will be June, July, and August. And they are looking for Detroit, Michigan-based vendors, artists, live bands, food trucks, and sponsors for events. Please reach out for additional information, 248-504-8266. And then I have myself a book signing with Tim Ellerby II, and we will be at the General Baker Institute on Livernois. That's Saturday, May 20th at 2 p.m.
Hold your book up.
Okay, I will be selling and signing. Where's my camera? Selling and signing the books. And the books are also available at charjay.com, but we'll be at the General Baker Institute, 15798 Livernois on Saturday, May 20th at 2 p.m. And Diamond and Tim Erogenous, they will be performing, so it's going to be a fun afternoon. What do you have, John? You got some
Well, what I
announcements,
have,
too.
let me hold up my newest poetry book, Athletes, Activism, and Apple Boughs, a Detroit poetic epic, which is now available on Amazon.com. And in it I discuss all of the athletes I coached or ran against or was teammate with. And my activism, I talk about all my social activism, which I've been doing my entire life. And the apple boughs part of it is based on I use the word apple boughs because I liked a poem that the Welsh poet wrote. When I was free and easy under the apple boughs, that was Dylan Thomas, and that's about my adventures with the ladies. But that's what this book basically is all about. Yeah. But anyway, and also let me say this before I forget. I got to make sure I do this. Miss Virginia Starkey, fondly known simply as V, the proprietress of V's Boutique, offers a wide range of fine clothing and accessories for ladies. And you can find all sizes of women's fine apparel in V's one-stop excellent customer service at V's Boutique that you can't find anywhere else in Detroit anymore. V's is at 16423 East Warren Avenue. 16423 East Warren Avenue, right around the corner from the Alger Theater, and right around the corner from one of the few libraries that hasn't closed. And you can make an appointment with V by calling 248-662-6622. That's Miss Virginia Starkey, 248-662-6622. 6622. And that's the same Virginia Starkey who used to be president of the River House Co-op Board. And I'm kind of in league with her right now to try to see if we can save that building from being taken over by some of the evil powers. Okay, and we are interviewing Elena Harada today. Elena, by the way, I signed this book to Elena. She asked me for this other book, but I was out of them. That was my first book, Poetic Prancings, a lifelong poetic prancings of Man John. But in this, I signed to Elena for Elena, my good friend and progressive fellow activist educator, John, May the 3rd, 2023. And now I'm going to hand the book to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
And don't show it to any little kids because it's somewhat R-rated.
Another one.
Another one. Okay. What has happened so far? I'm quoting your questions about the tax captures, who's subject to them, what does it mean for our city, and what has happened in this regard so far, and who is fighting this?
Who's fighting it? Very good question. We have recently, well, I want to start with a little group called the Friends of the Bowen Branch Library. Doesn't it sound like an innocuous group? Friends of the Bowen Branch Library.
I'm aware of them. Yeah.
We started that group. I started it in 2018 because it looked like they were going to try to close the library. And as you know, we know what it looks like when they're going to close a perfectly viable institution, like they did the Western YMCA, like they did the Oakman Orthopedic, like they did Detroit Day School for the Deaf, like they did Southwestern High School, like they did Catherine Ferguson Academy, and so many other schools that were perfectly not only needed but very viable. They said that they were closing failing schools, but what they were really coming after was effective and excellent schools.
Southwestern was no failing school. They had Betty Hines there as a principal, whom I had hired when I was an administrator, back in the 50s. Brilliant principal. Scores were good. She was doing
it's been torn down recently, but we still owe the bond money until 2059. The old Redford High School was torn down, and a Myers was given that spot. Myers got a tax abatement, but we owe bond money on the school that no longer exists until 2059. I'm going to give a shout out to Inkster, who also is fighting. They don't have any schools, but they also have to pay bonds for schools that don't exist too. This is what
Highland Park.
Highland Park. Don't even start. We'll come to that another day. But Highland Park, it's really a thing that they do. But what is the common thread of Highland Park, Inkster, Benton Harbor, Muskegon Heights, Detroit? What is the common thread, and why does the governor not want to get rid of the emergency manager laws? There have been many white cities that were as broke and as desperate as, especially Benton Harbor, which is, the saddest story, where their land was taken and the beautiful Jean Clark Park was given to a golf course, despite the fact that the land was supposed to be in perpetuity given to the people of Benton Harbor. That would be like if they turned Clark Park into Duggan Park. So if this happens in Benton Harbor, it can happen in all the other black cities, but it never happens in the white cities. I'm calling out to all the Democrats in Michigan. Let's try to persuade the governor to end the apartheid laws. They've done very well for labor, done very well for women, are doing well for immigrants, but what about the black cities in Michigan? And I say this as a resident of Detroit, where the majority people in Detroit are black people, right? Why then is there a white mayor? Why is there a white school superintendent? And watch what happens to Wayne State. We'll see what happens to Wayne State when they get a new president. I'm taking bets on this. It's very important. I don't think that race is everything, and I'll tell you why. I think that when we got a Latino city council member, it didn't matter. We got a Latino city council member that just voted to give a billionaire a tax abatement. So I don't think that it necessarily matters what color the city council person is, because we got sold out along with everybody else. So the Latino community has not fared better having a Latino representative, except for the optics of it. That part of it, yeah, of course. You have a little Latina up there on city council. We're very proud of that. But for what? For what? Why
Whites-
can't we
whites-
have somebody that will defend the people?
Whites don't have a corner on corruption, you know. When I was a superintendent or deputy superintendent in predominantly white districts or overwhelmingly white districts, I saw a lot of corruption. But when I came back to Detroit, I felt I was going to be welcomed with open arms. You know, how wrong I was. You know, I found out very quickly that there were black folks that were exploiting black kids. It wasn't racism, it was classism. And we're still fighting that right now.
I think it's more than classism. I think it's also self-loathing. And there is a real thing of self-loathing, of not wanting to have, of maybe wanting to be the only one that's favored by whites, because everybody seems to think that it's a good thing to get invited to the important places and to be liked by the rich people. I think there is a real thing about that. If you want to be liked by rich people, you are bound to be corrupt, because you have to be corrupt to be rich, period. You have to be corrupt to be rich. Why else would you be rich in a poor world? How else would you manage to have so much more than the people around you? If you have 2 coats and the person next to you has none, you're corrupt.
Amen.
I know you may disagree with that. You may disagree with that, but if you can walk around here, let me ask, how do the people move into Detroit blindly? Just move into a place. How is it that some people can get a house for a song because it was foreclosed on and then have all the money to fix it up? Don't you wonder what happened to the generations of people who lived in that house
Exactly.
before? Did they just
Exactly.
walk away from it? Were they just incompetent?
No,
Did they
no,
just not want that house?
no.
No. What? Maybe they couldn't afford the car insurance in Detroit anymore. Maybe they needed the grant that Duggan turned into a loan for the home repair program. Maybe they couldn't afford the lien on the water in their house because they had been pushed out by these policies that Duggan has imposed, that the administration, Duggan, I'll call it Duggan, but he's just the face of this corruption. There's a million more where he came from. But for people to not wonder why they can come to Detroit and live so well among so many people, do you wonder why there's 100 people waiting for a bus that may or may not come while you're driving by them? Does it just seem natural to you that there's such an incredible difference in the way people live in Detroit?
Panhandlers at every corner going onto the freeway.
Yeah, there's a lot of poor people living under the bridges. There's a lot of poor people like you've never seen before. I don't buy that racket either. I don't buy the racket of people sitting at the corner saying, you know, we'll work for whatever, because there's no hustle there. They're just sitting there asking for money. I don't buy that either. I'm not one to give them money at the corner.
I've done it. Adrian used to get mad at me when I did it.
I don't.
She said they're just going to go buy drugs. I said, well,
I don't care what they buy with it.
Yeah.
I don't give men that are standing there money because I just think you could do something. I mean, that's just my opinion. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but I'm not going to give which looks like an able-bodied person. You know, you're at the gas station begging for money. Why not ask this gas station owner, can I sweep your parking lot
Right.
for a couple of dollars? Or so.
You know, I want to raise it. There was a little strip mall near my house. It's on Verner and Lansing. And one day I went to get a phone at the Metro store. That's my phone place. And the place was so filthy outside. It was overrun with trash.
Right.
It was just disgusting. And I went into each store in the little strip mall. This part of it to me was fascinating because I went to every single store to ask them who's responsible for cleaning up out here. It's a like L-shaped, and there's a dollar store, there's a Chinese restaurant, there's a little clothing store, there's a Metro PCS store, there's a Mexican restaurant, well, a Salvadoran restaurant, and there's a pizza place. So there's maybe 7 businesses there. Each person said they did not know who was responsible for cleaning up, and there was a homeless guy out there asking for some money. And I said, why don't you clean this place up for them and get some money from them? And he goes, I offer every day, and they will not pay me to do it. So there is more to that. I understand what you're saying, and there should be, but there's nobody held responsible for the filth. And also, the gas station does hire the homeless guy, but
if
those
the people
places don't.
complain, because I'm not stepping over trash to come into your establishment. I'm just not doing it. I don't think I'm better than anybody or anything.
Yeah, right.
I'm
But
just
you
gonna-
deserve better.
I'm not going to walk
Yep.
over trash to get in there. So therefore, if me, the consumer, goes into the store and says, "Hey, if you don't clean this up, I won't come to your restaurant." Then, so the people have to hold the business people responsible, because if nobody tells them to do it, if you're going to still come there regardless of how nasty it is, because to me that's indicative of it's probably nasty in here too. So
Right,
I'm not
it's,
gonna-
it really is, but they don't care,
Right,
because
right.
there's a population of people who have no choice but to go to the places where
I
you walk to.
understand that, but still
Yep.
speak up.
Yep.
You're watching WJZZ Cool TV, live streaming on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter, and other top social media platforms. Like, follow, share, comment, and subscribe. Thank you for watching WJZZ Cool TV, the coolest station in the world. I need you to sum it up for us. We're on our last 5 minutes.
Okay,
Well, you get two when he
Okay.
gets
So
one.
can I do it first?
yep,
That's up to you.
Okay, because I never get to get this poem in. I always have to rush it. And the poem is The Turd That Hasn't Flushed. I wrote this poem on the 6th of January 2021, and you remember what happened on that day. On this evil and fatal occasion of the Capitol building invasion, the traitor Trump's collusion demands his execution. God yet hasn't pushed the lever on the traitor Trump forever. When he does, I hope it's the lever of the gas chamber.
Okay, now
Okay,
sum it
now
up for
Elena,
us.
sum it up.
okay. I would like for our listeners to, if you're on Facebook or social media, go to Friends of the Bowen Branch Library, parentheses, Save the DPL Coalition. You will find there all the updates. We have excellent volunteers who write every day on this page, give updates every day. And as I have said to so many people in so many struggles, every day we do something. Now, you might not be able to win every battle, and we are fighting a giant corrupt empire, but every day we can do something. Every day we contact our legislators when it comes to that point. It's not to that point yet. We are doing an educational campaign for people to understand the tax captures, because we can't do anything until we understand what this means. We just can't really wrap our heads around it until everybody knows. And that's why sometimes you might see banners on the freeway that say certain things like save the libraries and abolish DDA, because the Downtown Development Authority could really be abolished and the money could go back into the places it's
And how
intended.
could you be contacted?
You can contact me on Facebook, Elena Herrada, ELENA HERRADA. I'm on Facebook. I'm
Elena
on
Herrada at,
Elena M, as in Margaret, Herrada 2 at gmail.com. But if you go on my Facebook,
Numeral 2.
the
Elena,
number 2, right,
Elena M.
Elena
Herrada
M Herrada number 2
2
at gmail.com.
gmail.com.
But you can
All right.
find me easily on Facebook and Instagram.
That's
Okay.
going to do it for us.
Thank you so
for
much.
joining
You've
us.
been listening to the John Telford Detroit Show with Dr. John Telford and co-host Charlotte Jones on WJZZ Detroit Internet Television, coming to you live every Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock. Also streaming on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Contact Dr. Telford at 313-460-8272. That's 313-460-8272. Or at Dr. John Telford, EDD, at AOL.com. That's DRJOHNTELFORDEDD at AOL.com. To sponsor or appear on this show, or to get signed copies of his book, which Hill Perkins, Jeffrey Feiger, and Dr. Wayne Dyer all call spellbinding and sensational. It was the late, great Dr. Wayne Dyer who said, Dr. John Telford has a warrior's heart and a poet's soul. Read Dr. Telford's commentaries on the schools and other vital topics in the Telford Telescope column in the Detroit Native Sun newspaper. And also hear him on his other station, WCHB AM 1340, every Saturday morning at 9:30 and Monday evening at 6:30. That's every Saturday morning at 9:30 a.m. and Monday evening at 6:30 p.m. on WCHB AM 1340. Tune in again next Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock to the John Telford Detroit Show here on WJZZ Cool TV with Dr. Telford and co-host Charlotte Jones. Thank you for listening to the John Telford Detroit Show.